I want us to take some time to understand the land shift dynamic from pre-colonial Africa to date. It's estimated to have been 6 generations now since land ownership in the African continent shifted from being a right to a financial asset. This is based on historical analysis in the current housing data as of 2004. As I do my best to educate about Indigenous African architecture, one of the biggest issues that ties to this topic and sometimes acts as a barrier to building indigenously is the issue of land ownership. I have created a very simple fact sheet today to walk us through this change. But before I share it, I just want to address one comment related to this topic. When I talk about indigenous or building indigenously from an African context, I'm referencing what we now call tribes in Africa, because these are the people who are indigenous to the land. I see in the comment section sometimes some of the people who are in the Americas, when I use the word indigenously, they tend to think of the indigenous people in the Americas, but that's not what I'm referencing. And so when I'm talking about indigenous people in the African continent, I am referencing what we now call tribe. I just want to avoid the word tribe because of the negative connotation that sometimes the word tribe comes with. With that said, let's look at the first generation, and this is the generation that existed between pre-colonial Africa to the 1880s. We'll call this the right of use era. To fully understand what we have lost, we must look at the baseline. In pre-colonial Africa, social political structures, whether among Asante, Shona, or Zulu, land was fully owned by the people in these communities. In fact, these communities were considered micronations because they were free to fully govern themselves and forge their own way of life. This is the generation that truly enjoyed the freedoms of calling the land their own. But even though they had so much wealth, they understood that for the land to continue to take care of them, they must respect it and learn to be one with the land. They worked with the community to make sure that the land was in good shape. The vibe in this generation was that of security and belonging. Land was not owned by individuals but held in trust by ancestors or chiefs or kings, or let's say a leader of that community. And if you're curious about how they managed the land, well, upon adulthood, which was estimated to be around between 18 to 20, a young man was allocated land by the lineage head. There were no purchase price. Landlessness was effectively 0%. If you're a member of the tribe, you had land. Access was determined by social maturity, not financial liquidity. The currency was loyalty and labor, and the construction of the home was often communal. This was the era where we start to talk about now social capital. But then things started to change in the second generation, and this second generation existed between the period of 1890s to 1950s, and we can call this the colonial Rupture era. This is where the disconnect truly began. Because if you remember, in 1884, a bunch of people sat in a room in Berlin, Germany, and during the Berlin conference, they drew a map, and they decided that this part now where they drew the map was going to be called Africa, and that is what we know today, the continent to be. They agreed that they're going to own the land, but not just the land, but they're also going to own the people, which is crazy. As a result, when colonialism was officially launched, the colonial administrations introduced two devastating concepts: crown land and the title deed. And I know some of you might have your title deeds now because you own land, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. Know that that is a result of the colonialism that took place. This shift defined ownership from use to paper. The vibe here was that of trauma and restriction. The colonial powers like British, French, Germany, Portuguese seized customary land and declared it property of the crown. They took over the land through alienation and forced the people into labor. In settler colonies like Kenya, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, fertile land was seized. Locals were pushed into what we call native reserves. These were tracts of land set aside by European colonial powers and later the US government for indigenous peoples, primarily to clear land for the settlers, to make sure that they control the indigenous African population, and also forcibly assimilate them into European culture. So this is where we started to have widespread of values like Christian values in the Bible, if you remember. By 1914 in South Africa, 80% of the land, for instance, was reserved for white minority under the Natives Lands Act in 1913. This created a structural deficit we are still paying for. According to Reuters article written in February 10th, 2005 by Tim Cooks, it says here, and I quote, "Mostly white-owned farms around here are among nearly 26 million hectares. About 3/4 of privately owned land still is in the hands of whites, who make up to 80% of the population. Only 4% of privately held land is owned by blacks, who are nearly 80% of South Africa's 60 million population." When I read this, I'm telling you, my heart dropped, because this is crazy to me that 8% of the population can own all these massive pieces of land, while 80% of the population who are also indigenous to the land are still struggling today. Well, let's continue to address this. Let's move forward to the third generation. This was the period between 1960s and 1970s, and we will call this period the Mirage of state support. With independence came a brief flicker of optimism. Leaders like Nkrumah, Nyerere, Kenyatta attempted to replace the colonial crown with a post-colonial state. But frankly, the execution of it caused even more problems, and I'll explain in a few here why. If I am to reflect on everything, I would literally say it feels like we jumped genuinely from the frying pan to the fire, because the decisions that were made during this time were completely devastating. The vibe in this era was that of optimism and state support. Post-colonial governments promised housing for all. Many states built large-scale public housing systems. For instance, the FESTSC town in Nigeria. Civil servants and middle-class professionals were given government mortgages and allocated plots, which was a very promising plan, frankly, if it was sustainable. Urbanization was low in this period as well, estimated at 15 to 20%. So land in the cities was still cheap and accessible to the educated class. The government in this period was the primary developer. But here's why the whole plan failed. When flags changed from British to French, from British or French to Kenya or Ghanaian, the ownership of the soil did not automatically change with them. In fact, independence agreements often came with what I would call poison pill clauses that protected European property rights, forcing new African governments into debt to buy back their own country, which is crazy to me. Here's a detailed breakdown of how this happened. I will split this into two main types of colonial experiences: the settler colonies, where Europeans lived, and then the extraction colonies, where they just ruled. Let's start with the settler colonies. In countries with large white populations, the British government made land protection conditions of independence. They forced the new African leaders to sign constitutions that guaranteed private property rights. This created a system called willing buyer, willing seller, where new African governments could not just seize the stolen land and give it back to the tribes. They had to buy it from the white settlers at full market price. Not half, not quarter, not 0. No, full market price. Since the new governments were broke, the British government loaned them the money to buy the land. The African country started its life with massive debt to Britain. The white settlers got paid cash and left. Some of them stayed. The African government had to sell land to its citizens to pay back the loan. This was a trap, and I call this a new form of one of the most sophisticated form of colonialism, because it was a system that automatically siphoned resources from the continent without the colonizer being physically there managing the resources. Imagine someone steals land, forces you to work on the land for your survival, and then tells you for you to be free, you have to pretty much buy the land back from them. And so you decide, okay, you're going to do this, but then because you do not have money, you end up taking the loan from them, and so now you become indebted, meaning that now you've not just trapped yourself, but you've trapped generations and generations to come. This is where we are 6 generations in, and things are continuing to get worse. Let me give you real life examples so that you understand what I'm talking about. Here's a little bit more context. In the 1960s, Jomo Kenyatta's, this is in Kenya, my country. In the 1960s, Jomo Kenyatta's government bought 1 million acres of the White Highlands from British settlers. The British government lent Kenya roughly 17 million. Think about that in the 1960s, how much money this translates to today. Because the government had to repay this loan, they could not give the land to the poor Mau Mau freedom fighters who had tirelessly fought for the freedom. They sold it to those who can afford the loans, the new African elite, politicians, civil servants, and loyalists. The white settlers were paid off. The African elite became the new landlords. The poor remained landless and squatters. With this problem existing, let's look at how things continue to evolve in the 4th generation. In the 4th generation, lived between the 1980s to the 1990s. And we can call this the period of the Neoliberal Betrayal. In the 1990s marked the collapse of the social welfare module due to debt crisis and external pressure. The vibe here was that of decay and self-help. IMF, World Bank policies forced government to slash budgets and stop subsidizing housing. This was now the continued manipulation and control from the former colonial masters, because truthfully, we were never truly free. The independence, the treaties we signed, those continued to entrap us. At this stage, the state retreated and the people started building informally. This resulted in the growth of slums like Kibera, Makoko, because rural migrants, remember, they kept coming into the city, and when they arrived, they found no government housing, because initially the government had said, we are all going to support you, we're going to have these big government-founded housing schemes, but frankly, that was just a trap. It was not sustainable. So by 1990, 40 to 60% of urban housing in major African cities was classified as informal. The citizens were literally abandoned by the state. Now come to Generation 5. This was between the period of 2000s and 2010s, and we'll call this the era of the incremental struggle. This is the generation of our older siblings and parents. The Africa Rising narrative brought foreign investment, but it distorted the land markets entirely. The vibe here was that of hustle and incrementalism. There was a shift, and the commodification of the land accelerated. Young people began buying land far on the outcasts, peri-urban, and building room by room with cash savings because banks will not lend to them. Mortgage penetration remained very low at 1% of GDP in most African countries versus 70% in places like the US. And financing was non-existent for the poor, completely zero. So they were literally on their own. Come Generation 6 now, which is between 2020 to date, we'll call this the era of exclusion. We have now arrived at the current land ownership crisis. The youth of today, the ladder has been pulled up entirely. The vibe here is filled with anxiety and exclusion. There is hyperinflation, currency devaluation, and unchecked land speculation. Home ownership is now mathematically impossible for almost 95% of youth without inheritance. We see the rise of generational rent, where young people are spending almost 50% of income on rent. The average urban land price has increased 400 to 1,000% in the last decade in cities like Accra and Lagos. So if you look at this gradual change that has forced more and more indigenous people not to be able to own land, and we've shifted from land being a right to land being a financial asset. I'm just curious if these are just 6 generations that have happened from pre-colonial to date. If we are to get to the next 6 generations, are we truly going to survive this? There's a serious crisis that needs to be addressed. Until today, this sophisticated colonial system that has been put in place has kept, for instance, 80% of indigenous South Africans out of their own land, and 8% of white people own a majority or like a huge piece of land. What do you think is the right solution here? We are in a situation where I don't know if in the next 6 generations or 20 more generations we can be able to survive this system. It's a severe system of extraction, and we need to put our heads together to think of what we can do. Let me know what you think.